Good afternoon, everyone, and please don't stand at this stage. I have to read this out in relation to the Code of Meeting Practice. This meeting is recorded and live streamed for public viewing via the internet in accordance with Council's Code of Meeting Practice, with the recording stored and made available to the public for later viewing. The recording is subject to copyright. Members of the public attending or speaking at this meeting will be recorded and publicly broadcast. By attending this meeting, you voluntarily consent your attendance and participation of being recorded. Any part of the meeting that is held in closed session will not be live streamed. Council requests that everyone present is respectful and uses appropriate language, and Council does not accept liability for any defamatory, discriminatory or offensive comments that are made during the course of the meeting. Please ensure that all electronic devices, including mobile phones, are switched to silent. Under the Code of Meeting Practice, public recordings of this meeting is prohibited without prior consent or authorisation by Council. Council's live streaming of meetings via Facebook is designed to encourage constructive dialogue. We remind users to be digitally responsible and respect their fellow posters. We ask users to keep comments relevant and not to spam or make personal or commercially sensitive information or post personal or commercially sensitive information. This includes content that may be defamatory, derogatory, offensive or discriminatory towards Council employees, councillors, other persons or organisations. Failure to follow Facebook house rules will result in comments being deleted, and if this behaviour persists, the user will be blocked as well as locked. Can I ask you all now to be upstanding for opening of the meeting? And acknowledgement of country by Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respect to elders, both past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today.
Thank you. And the meeting opening prayer, Reverend Matthew Brooks Lloyd, Mittagong Anglican Church, Mittagong.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you. Almighty God, we want to acknowledge that all our times, all our days are in your hands. You say in your word, before one of them came into being, you know it already. Help us to recognise who we are before you, to walk reverently and humbly in the positions of power and leadership we have. You establish rulers and authorities to govern people's lives, and we want to thank you that in our nation Australia we have stable, good governments. We thank you that in Australia we enjoy freedoms to express opinion, and it is often through times of disagreement that good outcomes can be forged. And so, Almighty God, enable this meeting today, the Wingecarribee Shire Council, to make progress through consideration and discussion. Enable each member of Council to serve the community for the common good. Save each member from vice and anything that might promote self-interest. Thank you for the honour you have given to each member of this Council to represent local residents, business and community groups. Please help them today. Please guide them and please use them. May this meeting run smoothly. Please strengthen each member to do what is right before you, and so may good local government continue to be a hallmark found of this Council. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you, Reverend.
Mr Mayor,
And
can I ask a question?
Yes.
About what you read out a minute ago, where it says you're not allowed to take without approval. To me, that seems to be an absolute wasted statement when you can actually put it on Facebook Live too. So I think that should be removed. It's not fair.
Well, we won't discuss that now, other than to say if you record it yourself, you can edit it and paste and copy and do certain things with your self-recording, with your own recording. You can't do it with council recording. But if you want to chase it up further, we'll discuss it later.
Okay, that's all. I just didn't make it.
Welcome to members of the press, members of the public, senior staff and fellow councillors. We have apologies from councillors Mark, Ward and McLaughlin. Would somebody move those? Move Councillor Turland and secondly Councillor Nelson. Put it, all in favour. Those against? Do you want me to do it in seriatim? Okay, then I'll ask for somebody to move that apologies be accepted in seriatim. Move Councillor Andrews, seconded Councillor Halstead. I'll put the first apology as, put that all in favour, against, carried. I'll put that, those in favour of Councillors Mark Ward apology be accepted. Please raise your hand. All councillors save Councillor Scandrett, who requested his name be recorded. All those in favour of Councillor McLaughlin being...
Can I speak on this?
Pardon?
Can I speak on this before we vote?
You have the right. It's a recommendation.
Look, Mr Mayor, I think I can see where this is going because of the it's being voted on in seriatim. Councillor McLaughlin, to his defence, is a long-serving councillor, and I believe he deserves to miss a couple of meetings. He's put in over the years, a number of years, and he's got the runs on the board. It wasn't so long ago that a councillor's wife booked a holiday and said, "You'll be on the plane," and he was. So, you know, no, I didn't say any names. And that councillor got an apology. The other thing is that this council meets 20 times a year. Now, we're only required to meet 10 times a year. So that's quite an impost on the councillors here to serve that time. Now, council tried to go to the committee system and have council once a month, and that system failed, Mr Mayor. I think you'd recall that. So we're back to the 2 meetings a month, and so I'm suggesting that we give Councillor McLaughlin a break and provide an apology. And look, if you really want to put in a dissenting vote, do that, but he deserves to have an apology accepted.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandrett.
What a load of waffle.
What
a load of waffle.
Mr Mayor. Point of order.
No, there's no point of order.
We only have to attend 20 meetings a year. It was only a while ago I said we could cut that back to a meeting a month, and it wasn't supported, but in view of the business papers in recent times, it might be worth revisiting that. But look, if people are sick or they have family crisis, yes, absolutely, totally agree, Councillor, but not when you're going off sailing or holidaying or travelling overseas or whatever you're doing. In this case, I'm sorry, I just don't support it. If you put your hand up to be on council, you put your hand up to be on council. So I'm not going to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In reference to Councillor McLaughlin, this is certainly not personal, and I'm sure it isn't with other councils as well, but you know, I think the number's close to 18 now in this term. It's far too, you know, it's out of control. I mean, there's an absolute obligation when you're elected to attend all meetings and have one or two where there's good reasons with health or otherwise. I just believe it's not correct and not right, hence I vote that way.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Turland.
Well, look, for $400 a week, people have lives. I have a life. McLaughlin has a life now, he's retired. So I think it's quite acceptable we do take his apology this time. I didn't last time, but I will be voting for his apology this time.
Thank you. And now, with that closed, I put the recommendation that Councillor McLaughlin's apology be accepted. All in favour? All councillors save Andrews and Scandrett, and you wish for your name to be... Councillor Scandrett has requested. And that is the first time I think in 25 years I've heard a debate on whether an apology should be accepted or not. We have the adoption of the previous minutes. Somebody like to move that way? Councillors Whipper and Scandrett. Any discussion on the correctness of the minutes? Then I put that. All in favour? Those against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, item 9.1, 1 to 53 Kirkham Road, declaring a non-pecuniary, non-significant declaration of interest there. The architect who's put that application in has done work for me over the years. I'll stay in the chamber for that. For item 9.2, which is an item in Renwick, I'll be declaring a pecuniary and leaving the chamber as my family owns property in Renwick. Item 12.5, draft development control amendments in Renwick and other places. I'll be declaring a non-pecuniary, non-significant, mainly because we own property in Renwick, but there are others in there such as Berrima, and I'll be staying in the chamber.
And voting.
And voting.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm declaring a pecuniary interest in item 11.1, the rugby club tender. As a subcontractor, I've provided a quote for a particular part of the scope of this project to one of the companies who have submitted a tender. I will be leaving the chamber and won't be voting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turland.
Yeah, 19.1 tender for the rugby club. As one of the tenderers is on the 4K committee with myself, and so I'll take no part in the debate and voting.
Thank you. And Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, item 12.4, modification of approved vehicle repair station, 80 Station Street, Beryl. My son is the director of the company or the firm that the private certifier is employed by. It's a non-significant, non-pecuniary, and I have no financial interest in that matter whatsoever or that firm.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. No further declarations of interest. Before we move into the business paper, I'd like just to make comment to Councillor Andrews. His mother-in-law died on Monday, I think. And if you would pass on our condolences to your wife, Noretta, from council and council staff. We now move on to public forum, and we don't have any public forums. We have visitor items, and we'll start on 9.1. It's a multi-dwelling housing, 9 dwellings, lot 10 DP 38607 and lot 53 DP 11200498, 5153 Kirkham Street, and Mr Scott Lee will address council on behalf of the applicant. Mr Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lee.
Yeah. Thank you, councillors. This matter, I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant and the property owner this afternoon. This matter revolves around one minor non-compliance of just one of council's planning guidelines. That particular guideline, landscaped area, is recognised as being incompatible and out of sync, in fact inconsistent with other guidelines, and in need of a review if broader important strategic goals are to be obtained. 50% landscaping for medium density. It's a problem child, hindering others and not being treated in a consistent manner. In this case, we don't believe that the single minor numerical deficiency of the 50% landscaped area is grounds for a refusal. My reasoning for that, apart from the question of permissibility versus prohibition, there are no absolutes in the development assessment process, Legislation requires council to consider a range of various matters that are brought forward in numerous planning-related documents. For any one development, there's usually a large number of considerations to be had. Further, when you undertake assessment work, it's quickly apparent that the same planning guideline doesn't necessarily have the same importance or impact on every single development proposal. The combination of site characteristics, context, design, responses, all influence outcomes. This is so for landscaping control that's very sensitive to lot size and configuration. Simple example of this is that site layout is different on longer, narrower lots than it would be on, say, square corner allotments. Site layout then impacts on driveways and landscaping and site coverage in different ways. Multiply this over and over with all the different guidelines in the DCP, and the expectation that the same result that can be achieved every single time is optimistic at best. The assessment process, therefore, is charged with the responsibility of making sense of this melting pot of planning objectives, guidelines and site circumstances. The aim of the assessment process is to enable development outcomes. By its very nature, it's a positive system, not a negative one. It is not one strike and you're out. That's why, in this case, I believe the recommendation to refuse the DA is not the most appropriate decision. If I may, I might just use an analogy to emphasise this point and perhaps provide an insight into how the applicant views the situation. Imagine you're still at uni and sat your final exams. Exam papers returned with ticks and positive comments throughout and a final score of 99 out of 100. The examiner has assessed your work, recognised all the effort and the positive answers to the questions that were set for you. But down there in the bottom corner, next to the score of 99, there's a big red F for fail. Apparently, the lecturer didn't like one small aspect of just one of the myriad answers you'd provided. I'm not sure anybody in this room would consider that remotely fair or reasonable, but that's the fate of this DA. The simple fact in this case is that the proposed development is providing the type of housing that council's planning strategies and planning controls want. It's providing housing in a location that's earmarked for that type of housing, and it's an ideal location.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Any questions to Mr. Lee? Councillor Turley.
Yeah, look, in your travel as a JRPP representative and knowing the town planning issues, in other areas, what is the requirement for landscaping in similar areas to the Wingecarribee?
That's many and varied different ways of achieving that. Some councils have landscaped area as a development standard, unlike here where it's in a development control plan, which inherently is more flexible. The legislation actually requires council to be flexible in the application of a DCP, unlike development standards which have a more vigorous, robust and structured way of seeking variations to them. The legislation relevant to DCPs specifically says council must deal with them in a flexible manner. So some councils have landscaped areas in LEPs, many do have them in DCPs, some don't have that particular control at all.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Scandrett.
Mr. Lee, if this was a seniors living development, and we've had some recently, what would be the, you may not have calculated this, but the gut feel, what would be the landscaping requirement, outcome, in that situation?
Well,
Mr. Lee.
yeah, thank you, Councillor. The development control plan for Mossvale, similar to other towns, has provisions in it for seniors housing. They call up or refer to the state policy for seniors housing, although as we know that state policy doesn't strictly apply in the Shire at the moment anyway. But there is no other provision in that set of controls in the DCP to give a figure for landscaped area. By reference to the state policy, landscaped area is not a reason that can be refused if you provide 35%, which is significantly less than 50%. Recent example of that being Colo Vale Seniors Housing Development dealt with by council had, I think, 33%. So an applicant looking at council's DCP and how that's structured and the requirements of it would be working to a minimum of 35.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
We recently sent an applicant back for further discussion with the staff because they didn't meet the requirement, and that was at Bowral. So do you think that the council could apply a different standard for Bowral as opposed to Mossvale?
Mr Lee.
Well, the control in the DCP, whether it's in the Mossvale DCP or the Bowral DCP, is the same numerically. But my point I was making in my address was that DCP provisions in particular are meant to be dealt with in a flexible manner. They're also meant to be, and this is by the legislation, that council must consider those provisions in connection with the assessment of that particular development application. So there is nothing wrong with the council arriving at a decision that supports a DA with 43% landscaping as distinct from arriving at a position that supports one at 47 or 50 or whatever other figure. It's the combination of the assessment that's important, or the result of putting all of the requirements together that is important. And when it comes to development control plan provisions, the legislation is quite clear that council should be doing so in a flexible manner, not a strict enforcement manner.
Thank you. Councillor Toolin, you've had a question.
I was going to move a motion to defer it to the applicant.
Okay, well, Councillor Halstead might have a question. Councillor Halstead.
Thanks for your dissertation. I think your 99F is preposterous, to be honest with you, but, best of luck trying to argue that one.
Question?
I've never seen that.
Yeah,
Question is, having regard to the fact that DCP deals with controls and not standards, as you rightly said, they're not development standards in DCPs, they're controls, you would have to agree that one of the aims of the legislation to ensure that there is in fact some form of or level of consistency. In fact, courts have determined that many times. So do you really think that this council should be put in a position that it accepts a percentage, for example, on landscaping that's quite removed from the standard, or not the standard, the control, the guide, because clearly they are guides?
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Mr Lee.
I'd just reiterate what I said before, and I think in answer to Councillor Nelson, is it's the totality of the assessment that's most important, and the judgment that's brought to that, and the conclusion when you factor in a multitude of development, either standards or guidelines or controls. So I think that's most important. I think you are right to point out that some consistency in decision making is preferable, but that doesn't mean that all decisions are the same. Consistency does not mean the same. It means bringing all of those things together in assessing a DA. Inconsistency would be putting some of those controls aside and not factoring them in. That's inconsistent. Consistency is bringing all of the same things to bear on the same type of application and then making a judgment. And in this case, I'm saying that the judgment should be approval because we have a compliant development in all respects, positive outcome, except for that one very small matter. I stand by my analogy of 99 out of 100. I think it's a really good one, and it's a practical one that people can understand.
Thank you. Thank you. Scott.
Thanks very much.
See you. Okay, we are. Councillor Turland has flagged a motion. Councillor Turland.
Look, I'm going to flag a motion exactly what we did in Sheffield Street, where we defer this matter so that council staff and the applicant can work through the non-compliance of 50% landscape requirement as per the DCP. That's the words. So we'll go back and type that up.
That is it.
You're already there. Option 2. Yep.
So let's move the be deferred to request the applicant to submit amended plans to address. And just for those who are watching live streaming while this is going up, the recommendation be refused. So council is trying to work a way through to not refuse it, but to work with the applicant. So we got, no, we
It's pretty
have
well. Same as
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Whipper. While that's going up, Councillor Turland, then you may speak to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Look, looking at the drawings here, it's so close. It's exactly what we did with Sheffield Street. We actually, on page 4, you can actually read in the first set of paragraphs there what we did. It was 42.4 in Sheffield. To achieve the 50%, we actually deferred it back in the 14th of August. And they've achieved the 50% because now it's been approved. So what we have here is we're 43%, so 260 square metres, 261 square metres short. Not a big area to achieve to comply with the DCP. I would think that if the applicant could come back to us even at, say, might only be 5% short instead of the difference we've got at the moment, we might come very close, even 2%. But looking at the plans as best we can from the drawings we've got on Annexure 2, the buildings that are further down the back in Wattle Creek, looking over the golf course, they could be changed or redesigned to give more landscape area but still give the floor area with a 2-storey development there. Or back in units 9 and 1 in the front boundary, they could go to 2-storey and move the front setback further than the current ones that are on both sides. That would also achieve the extra square metres required for the landscaping DCP. So there's a couple of opportunities there. They're not far off it, and I would hope to think that the council laws will, as we did in Sheffield Street, allow the applicant to work with council staff just to fine-tune it and hopefully come back with the proposal. At this moment, if it's deemed for refusal, that means it's either an 82A review or off to the court on one small amount of non-compliance. That would be a shame for public money to be spent, let alone the applicant. We're so close. There's no list of 15 items, it's only one. So I hope councillors will support the deferral as we did in Sheffield Street.
Thank you, Councillor Turland. Any other speakers? No other speakers. Then I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand as it's a planning matter. Councillor Scandrett, Turland, you voting? Councillor Nelson, no. Councillor Andrews, Whipper, Halstead and Gare. Those against, Councillor Nelson. I declare it carried. We now move on to 9.2, and Mr Lee is very close to being coming forward to speak to the application.
Sorry, I'm back again.
You're right. And I'll read the application. It's DA 19/1571, 12 Solomon Street, Renwick, for a 2-storey detached dwelling, dual occupancy, and the recommendation from staff is that it be refused.
Yep.
Mr Lee.
Thank you,
have
Mr
the
Mayor,
floor.
councillors. Thank you again for the chance. I'm speaking on this matter on behalf of the owner and applicant, Paul Samulski from PS Design and Construction. Similarly to the previous matter, it's a case here in our belief that we have a compliant development and not substantial grounds for refusal. The applicant, the DA before you this afternoon, follows on from an earlier application refused by council. Following that, the applicant took heed of those reasons for refusal, including discussion that was had here at the council, and amended the plans. Now, having read the report to this afternoon's paper, I must object. I don't think it's a fair and reasonable assessment of the DA. The proposed development, in my view anyway, is textbook reading of the DCP requirements for Renwick, which was specifically designed for Renwick. And it's been designed with a meticulous eye for the multitude of guidelines in that section, and as a result, it's fully compliant and certainly not inconsistent with other approvals issued within Renwick. It's permissible development. Where it strays from council, it appears, is in the position expressed in the report that it contains some second level. I must note at this stage that references in the report to the draft DCP changes are irrelevant and should be struck out. Legislation makes that quite clear. A draft DCP is not a matter for consideration, unlike a draft LEP. Okay. Also, it's not a planning instrument, as it's described in the report. So, getting to the heart of the matter, I just want to make the point that council seems to me, in any event, that they're trying to impose a preference over compliance with adopted planning controls, and this is the point I made last time. Preference is not my word, by the way, it's the word used in the DCP, although such preference is not supported by all of the other guidelines within the DCP. It would seem, therefore, that council prefers housing to be single-storey, whereas the planning controls that the applicants are guided by allow exactly the form of development proposed. The end products resulting from the development process can be many and varied, and there's no better example of that than housing. All sorts of housing exist within the Shire. We can walk around today to old areas, new areas, including Renwick, including Retford Park, for instance, including new housing along Erridge Park Road, where there are two-storey developments. So it's a little bit unclear as to why council's targeting Renwick and targeting single-level housing only, when their planning controls say the opposite. In a low-density residential location, two-storey dwellings actually offer some counterpoint to an interest to the streetscapes where they occur. It's particularly important on corner allotments. This is a good design outcome, not a poor one. The DA was designed, as I've said, having regard to all the requirements of the relevant Mittagong DCP, but in particular those that are specific to Renwick, which were designed for Renwick. There's no breach of the site-specific standards in relation to height, floor space and all of those other matters. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. You will have to do speed talking.
I think we'll
Less words.
But you get through it though. Councillor Toole.
So, you are of the opinion that on page 20 and 21, the only non-compliance now relates to the setbacks?
Well, I would dispute the non-compliance with the setbacks. That's an interpretation that we don't support. We've got, like I said before, the design or the designer rather, has been meticulous in going through the DCP. We have, I suppose, what you'd call a compliance table. The matter complies. The setbacks are not inconsistent with what other approvals issued for similar type development in Renwick. They do comply. It's a matter of interpretation as to what constitutes the lot at that point in time. The interpretation of the integrated housing provisions which apply to this because it's that size allotment. So we take the view that we have a complying development.
Now, can I step aside and put his button on and ask a question from Councillor Scan at the table?
No.
Thank you, Councillor
I
Toole.
guess not.
Councillor Nelson.
Thanks. I was actually going to draw the same point out, but I'll take it a little bit further in that it says in the report that on the one side there, the setback will be 2.895 metres, where it complies on the front setback. You're with me there?
Beg your pardon? So which page, sorry?
We're just
20 and
drawing out on
21,
page
please.
20 and 21 with the setbacks, which Councillor Turlin was also referring to. The first setback complies. It says 4.505 and the DCP requirement 4.5, where the other one is only 2.895 and the officers stating that it's required 4.5. But it goes on to say that a neighbour on that side would have to set back 6 metres. Now, from a planning point of view, you can correct me if I'm right or wrong, but from a planning point of view, if one house is only 2.8 back and the next one has to be 6 back, then does that throw the neighbourhood out of sync?
Oh, okay.
Thank you,
Councillor.
Councillor Nelson.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee.
I think the short answer to the end of that question is no. I mean, there's always a termination at the corner, and I think that's good. And some difference in setbacks is not necessarily a problem. But I think the issue here is also in the interpretation of the requirement, because as we pointed out, we've got a front setback of 4.5, which has been is compliant. They've imposed the same setback requirement on the other frontage as well, which is not how it's done. And I think that's the point of difference. Like I said, we say we have a compliance. The council is saying that that's not compliant, but I would question that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
See you next week.
Oh, you will.
Okay, now a few issues have been raised, and I think it would be appropriate for Mr. Pepping to give a introduction into relation to this because of some of the questions that have been raised. Mr. Pepping.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the General Manager, the purpose of this report is to deal with a dual occupancy development on a block of land measuring 494 square metres in Renwick. The applicant's consultant has spoken to councillors about the characteristics of that particular area. By and large, it is acknowledged that the applicant has modified this development from a previous development, which was clearly a two-storey development. Through the modifications, they've managed to put a lot of the second storey within the roof line, which is acknowledged. However, there are a couple of matters that the staff feel warrant a refusal of the application, and one of those is to do with the primary open space area, private open space, and more importantly, the second point which was discussed is to do with the setback of the second dwelling. So, just to summarise it, there's two dwellings on this particular block of land, and under the DCP, both dwellings are required to have a minimum setback of 4.5 metres. The first dwelling obviously does do that. The second dwelling doesn't, and it's relying on the provision of a secondary setback, which is 2 metres under the DCP. In recognising that, the applicant has attempted to push the house back at 2.895 metres, but the staff, in assessing the suitability of that particular setback, have taken into consideration the future setback of an adjoining development, which would be required to be 6 metres, given the size of that block. And on that basis, it's felt that if the secondary dwelling was set back a little bit further, it would give a more responsive setback in overall of the streetscape, rather than a very harsh 4 metres in variation. So it has been recommended for refusal, and that's before council.
Okay, questions to Mr. Pepping. Councillor Turley.
Well, first I'm going to flag recommended approval, but the question to you, Mr. Pepping, is this the only reason, major reason for refusal on this property? You mentioned two.
Through the chair, yes.
So in the DCP, you said open space. Is it clear in the DCP that says a certain amount of square metres has to be made for open space behind the second building?
Through you, Madam General Manager, Mr. Pepping.
Sorry, through the chair, the primary open space is to have a northerly aspect, and the front dwelling doesn't achieve the total of that requirement of northerly aspect, and that's why it was recommended a departure from the DCP.
Okay, it's still on the same path, this question, if you don't mind.
I'll allow you the leniency.
So what you're trying to say to us, that any corner block for a dual occupancy that doesn't meet the required square metres northern face should be refused?
Through the chair, it would be a merits assessment, depending on the orientation and the aspect of the development, and also depending on the height of the development will obviously give you different outcomes. Our responsibility is to make sure the occupants live in a very suitable environment, and having northerly aspects, particularly in our climate, coming into a private open space area is critical for a suitable habitable dwelling.
It's a merit-based decision.
It is a control under the DCP, and so it's measured against that control.
So not a merit-based decision. No, but you were, yeah, well, based on the controls. Yes, but based on the controls is very important to put in. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Talking black and white, a question, Mr Pepping. I understand all that you just said in regard to the front setback. The required, as you stated, it's in here 4.5. There's 1.6 difference at the moment. There is no room for compromise. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but 4.5 is it. Is that it? Is that correct?
Mr Pepping.
Through the chair, I guess the staff have suggested that that's what would achieve a supportable recommendation from the staff. If council wishes to accept something less than that, then that's a matter for council.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one. Mr Pepping, the only place you can put dual occupancies is corner blocks, is that correct?
Through the chair, no. You can do dual occupancies on any blocks. The only thing that makes an opportunity on a corner block is if you have a lot in excess of 1,000 square metres. You can then you can subdivide those two dwellings. Blocks under 1,000 square metres are prohibited from the subdivision, but you can still do a subdivision on any mid-block block, but there's no opportunity for subdividing those ones.
You virtually answered the question, but just following on, so really it's 1,000 square metres, a corner block does allow it, but when this subdivision was done, was dual occupancies really thought through in relation to a block of only 494 square metres or whatever?
Through the chair, I would probably have to say no. There was a lot of planning that went into the Renwick subdivision over quite a number of years, which involved the owners at the time, Landcom, who are still the owners, the community, and as well as council. And that goes back to the late 1990s and early 2000s, where there was considerations of how many lots would go into that particular area, and there was council wanted 400. I think Landcom were aiming for 800 to 1,000, and a figure of 600 was determined at the time. All of the planning in terms of developer contributions and so on were based on that 600 yield of dwellings. But bearing in mind that there is opportunities within through zonings and whatever to achieve some extra dwellings, and so we have had some dual occupancies, we've had some small allotments. So by and large, everything was planned on the basis of 600 dwellings, and the lot sizes accommodated those smaller dwellings and smaller allotment sizes, which there is a demand for in the community. So we weren't envisaging that those smaller allotments would then again be or further developed for two dwellings. We only ever envisaged one.
Thank you. Okay, so we are open for any other further comment.
Approval as per conditions in the attachment 1.
There won't be any.
Oh, you've got DAs here.
No, not for that development.
Okay, so you
No, well, there's.
Yeah,
You'll have to delegate to the general.
you'll have to delegate conditions of consent as to the general manager.
Determine the development application by way of approval in accordance with the recommendation and conditions of consent and attachment 4.
Yeah, just here.
That's in the options.
So if you go to the back of the report,
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, sorry.
so
Okay,
so you could move option 2,
Yep.
subject to having a seconder. Councillor Nelson. Okay, so while that's going up, Councillor Turlham, do you wish to speak to
Yes,
it?
please, if I can. Look, we've just approved to work through the issues in relation to Kirkham Road and any other multi-unit development site. And if you have a look at the previous plan in Kirkham Road, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Quickly, you can see the boundaries here. and there's only about, I can't read it, but I'd say it's about 1.5 metres off the back boundary. Now, what that does, it also, the northern face of that reflects that these new buildings will actually overshadow the previous approved buildings. So here we are going down a path of saying we don't have enough sun coming in on this particular development, and to me, it's got plenty more open space. I've actually highlighted and coloured it in for any council who wants to look at it. It shows there's enormous open space. Technically, what it is two reasons. One is the potential of the property to the south that hasn't been built yet. So it's not like it's constructed already. We don't know what's going to be built there, and the setback that's questionable should it come back further from the second setback from the second street. So the two reasons for refusal at this point seem to be the setback from one street. Instead of being 4 metres, it's actually 2.8, nearly 3 metres. And then the other issue is the northern sun not coming into this back courtyard area. But then when you look at these unit development in Kirkham Road and Sheffield Street and the rest of it, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because there's obviously these properties here are going to overshadow the neighbour's property clear as day. This doesn't overshadow the neighbour's property. They're just saying it doesn't give the purchaser of this particular unit, Unit 2, enough sun. To me, I don't think it's strong enough. We know we've got in the DCP changes at the moment to not allow dual occupancy on anything less than 1,000 square metres. I get that. This just happens to go through the process. This is a new subdivision on a greenfield site, and now we're saying we don't want this development. It's been approved through the system. It's been approved by the Department of Planning. It's owned by the government. I would think in every other shire, council, city, these sorts of development be knocked up on every second corner. But for some unknown reason, we're tying ourselves in knots here. And they're not strong enough. There's nothing strong enough that says the applicant has changed the design to make it rooms in the roof, because the previous DCP said, we encourage you not to do two-storey, which I find extraordinary. Encourage, the word encourage. But he's changed the design to suit what he wanted. But this is council's own building that we're paying for in Renwick's public building, and it's a two-storey building, black and white, 10 metres high. So council can build a two-storey, but this bloke can't, because it says encourage in the DA, in the DCP. But as I said, there's no multi-unit developments on Renwick. It's all to do with the biggest one is these dual occupancies.
Thank you, Councillor Turler. Yeah, maybe deferral would be the way to go. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, possibly. That could be a way to go, since there's a few councillors missing. But I'm happy to test the water and support the approval, particularly as the applicant went away and came back with amended plans. And I'm listening to what Mr. Lee is saying, and I'm hearing that it's a merit-based system. I would like to put a number 2 there, that council, if this is approved, that council inspect the building once it's completed. I think it'd be worthwhile for council that we should go and have a look at a few of these things that we actually approve, to see that that we're getting it right or we're getting it wrong, and make the adjustment.
Okay, then perhaps it should be on a council inspection. The council inspect on a council
on a council inspection. Yeah, we should see the site.
Yep.
So we'll see. There's only a few of us here. We'll see how it goes. Of course, the councillors can put in a rescission motion if they're not happy with the final outcome. I'll see.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper.
Look, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy if I'd consider a deferral. I'm not of the same opinion as Councillor Turlin. Like yourself, I go back, I remember Renwick when it was an idea.
So we flagging an amendment?
Look, I can flag an amendment given that we're down on numbers. a deferral.
Okay, well, if you
yeah.
move it as a deferral, for the reason being for the applicant to meet the setbacks
Or, you know, to discuss with staff,
discuss
you
with
know, the
staff.
issues around setbacks.
Okay,
yeah.
that the matter be deferred subject to the applicant being invited to meet with staff to alleviate the setback concerns in an
To address
attempt to...
concerns around the setbacks.
Can you get that worded, see how that's worded, please? Do you have a seconder? Councillor Andrews?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Because, as I was saying, like yourself, I was around when Renwick was just an idea. It came into being. It was the subdivision itself was basically thrust on council. As we know, it was community services land. We never had much of a say in it. But at the time, there was a great outcry from the community. I remember it well. Through that, there was a committee that was put in place. I chaired that committee for a while. That committee suggested maybe 400 dwellings. Renwick wanted 1,100 dwellings, the government, and the compromise was struck at 600. A lot of thought went into that, I believe. The fact that we're told by our staff that this is being measured against the DCP, I think we need to be consistent. There may be some opportunity for some variation, but I think it's better if we take that opportunity to try and get a little bit closer to the DCP expectations and maybe have other councillors here as well to make further considerations, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Andrews?
I speak for the amendment?
Yes.
At this time? Yeah, look, thank you, Councillor Whipper. I agree. I think the open space is not an issue with me, but I do support staff. And there is a matter of precedence here, I think, I believe, possibly, not yet, but possibly there is a matter of precedence. And being 1.6 metres, I know it's a fair chunk of a room or whatever the builder determines to do. I think if it's deferred, surely we can, our staff and the applicant can compromise and fix that 1.6. Thank you.
Thank you. And before you have the right of reply, if you wish, Councillor Turlin, yes, I'll support the deferral. Councillor Whipper has made the point that a lot of effort and time went in to compromise with the general community to try and turn Renwick into a development that the Shire can be proud of. And the other thing is we are going to move later on or it'll come to council for councillors during this business paper for variations to the DCP, which will draft development control plan amendments, which will effectively not permit this, as far as I'm aware, in 10 days' time. So council staff have picked up on this, and on a corner block for 498 square metres, I don't think it was ever designed for two residences to go onto a 500 square metre or 450 square metre block. And we have to compromise our DCP to meet the applicant's request. Well, we have a DCP and the applicant is to meet council's request. Not because we're being tough, but because we want good planning. Now, I can go either way. I can see the applicant's argument on this, but we're not asking for two. We want one, really one unit on that block, not two. And there's another, my understanding is there's another 490 square metre block on another corner that's got a DA in it to do the same thing. So are we going to set a precedent if we do this? Yes, because how are we going to knock back another one in a month's time? So I'll go for deferral, as much as it hurts me, because, but either you vote for or vote against, that's how you vote. But I think you might have to remove half a square of the house to get the setback. So, Councillor Turlin, do you wish a right of reply?
Yeah. If you look at this particular plan, the one, Unit 1, there's 1 metre setback between the wall and the boundary, which complies. The second unit we're arguing about at the moment is 2.1 metres, actually it's 3.05 metres. And the reason why he's done that is so he can comply with the sun requirement from the north, which has been part of the concern of council. So if he moves this building back again to match unit 1, 1.05, it achieves it in the front, but it gives it a horrible backyard. At least the unit 1 has it right round the whole other 2 sides to enjoy the front yard. To me, if you look at the yellow that I've highlighted, there's an enormous amount of open space that's been done, but he's designed it. He's compromised. He's made it a single storey or 2-storey with a dormer windows, not a 2-storey building, which he had every right to do, because the DCP just said encourage. Didn't say you couldn't, it says encourage. He's bent and twisted and developed this particular plan. To take another, well, I don't know what he can take. If he moves it back, it doesn't comply, but it complies in the front. If he takes the square metres off the front of the building, he still doesn't get what you want. 1.6 metres off a room at the moment that is only 3 metres wide. It can't happen. It's a total redesign. And, you know, as I said, if this goes to court, I can't see how the court would refuse it. It's done everything that it should do to comply, except the opinion of a staff member that the setback's not enough to one face because the building's not even built on the next site. The builder, whoever buys the site, or the owner buys the site next door, will have to develop their plan for their own requirements. But this will all be up and done and finished and built. And it's not causing any trouble to anybody. I don't understand. I understand about the 1,000 square metres and the 450 lots. But if it was that important, how long has Renwick been built now? What, 15 years? 10 years? And now we're picking up saying, well, we've got a problem. It should have been part of the 88B instruments on title on each of these blocks. Only one building could be built. It wasn't. He's doing everything that he can do. It's legally he can do this. We know other people have dual occupancies in the subdivision. And the councillors have, I understand, a dual occupancy. So, you know, I haven't done any research other dual occupancies in relation to this, but are the other ones in Renwick all on 450 lots with the same issue that we didn't pick up before? Don't know. Be interesting if that has happened. If it is, I think we're on a hiding to none. And I can't see how he's going to compromise anymore. He can't take it off the front of the building to sort the setback back, because if he moves the building back, then there's not enough sun coming into the back courtyards. The 2 reasons for refusal. Where does he go? He can't go anywhere.
Thank you, Councillor Turlin. So I put the amendment as moved by Councillor Whipper, and second to Councillor Andrews. All in favour? Councillors Whipper, Andrews and Gare. Those in favour of the motion? Put the amendment. All in favour? Oh, God. Sorry. So I put all in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Then I can declare the amendment carried. The amendment now becomes the motion. So all in favour of against the amendment? Amendment is carried. I declare the amendment now the motion. Put the motion. All in favour? Councillors Andrews, Whipper and Gare. Those against is Councillors Nelson and Turlin. Now we will move on to 11.1, tender for Barrel Rugby Club house redevelopment. Yes, we better give the others time to come back in.
It's a declaration.
Yes, I know.
Listen to my cue, because Peter started saying the same.
The what?
Let me prompt you.
Yeah, we're waiting for Councillor Halstead and Councillor Turlin.
No, Councillor Tyler's got a declaration of interest on this matter.
Oh, Councillor Turlin is.
Andrews. Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Is Councillor Halstead out there?
And Councillor Turlin.
There you go, got a quorum.
We were waiting, not very often that you make a quorum, Councillor Halstead, but you just did. So we have tender for Barrel Rugby Club. Do you want to move it, move the recommendation? Move what, number 1? Against, seconded Councillor Whipper. Any discussion? Put the recommendation. All in favour? Those against? Carried. I'll now ask the General Manager to read out the recommendation.
And the recommendation that the council has now adopted is that council accepts the tender from Lewis Building Company Pty Limited at a lump sum of $981,113, including GST, to undertake Barrow Rugby Clubhouse redevelopment stage 2. Sorry? What? Ah.
Okay. Then if somebody get Councillor Andrews, please. And Councillor Turland. So we're on page 34. 11.2, tender for water reserve cathodic protection, and there is 2 recommendations, one to go into close and one to adopt the recommendation that is in close. Councillor Scandred is moving 1, that the council adopts the recommendation in close. Seconded Councillor Whipper. Is there any discussion? Then I put it. All in favour, those against? Carried, and I'll ask the GM to read out the motion that was just passed.
And the recommendation that was just adopted by the council is that council accepts the tender from Corrosion Control Engineering Pty Limited at a lump sum of $205,772, including GST, to undertake the design and installation of cathodic protection systems on 5 steel potable water storage reservoir tanks.
Thank you, Madam General Manager. We move on to 11.3, page 39, 2018-19 annual financial statements. To councillors, it's just a straightforward. It's to be recommended that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be authorised to sign the statement by councillors and management. Move Councillor Whipper, second Councillor Andrews. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Those against? Carried. We move to page 60, 11.5, council licence agreement from Wollongong 4.
11.4.
I haven't got...
Page 41.
Page 41. It was... my 2 pinks were stuck on top of each other. 11.4, 2019 financial assistance grant allocations. Moved Councillor Scandrett and seconded Councillor Nelson. Do you want any comments from this, councillors? No. It is that we get $5.16885 million from the federal government for the year of 1920, untied. Put that. All in favour? Against? For, and those against? Carried. Now we'll get on to page 60, which is Council's licence agreement from Water New South Wales for a new rural fire shed at Fitzroy Falls. Moved. Okay, moved and second. Moved Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Scandra. Can we have an introduction, please?
Mr. Mooney?
Thank you, Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this report presents, the purpose of the report is to seek Council's approval to enter into a new licence agreement with Water New South Wales for the use of land being part Lot 1 DP 103, being 280 Wilds Meadow Road, Wilds Meadow. Councillors, the reason for the licence agreement is after a number of discussions with the Rural Fire Service, the land has been identified as being suitable for the relocation of the Avoca Rural Fire Service Brigade. As you would be aware, councillors, the Rural Fire Service are required to prepare a long-term strategic plan. They've identified the relocation of the Avoca Brigade as being an important aspect of that strategic plan. Once the licence agreement has been secured, the Rural Fire Service will then be able to begin preparations for future construction of a new brigade station on the proposed site. The funding for any proposed new brigade station would be through the state government RFFF, which is also known as the Rural Fire Fighting Fund, which council contributes 11.7% contribution towards each financial year. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Turner.
Showing the map on page 63, where the orange section shows where the property is, it's going to be to the fire station, are they going to have a big nose that drops into the water so they can suck the water up quickly? Is that part of a condition? You don't know. It's
I think there's a tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I mean, if the water's just there, it's a fire station, we're not allowed to touch it?
Well, you
Come on.
might be allowed to.
Come
They
on.
can put a snorkel down there. You go yabbing as well, Councillor Turlin. Yes, it's a good spot, right on the corner. We might even get a few potholes fixed up.
So you have a fire station with no water, it's right on.
They do have a pumping station there, and they do have a chlorination station as well. Okay, so put the recommendation as moved by Whipper and Scandrett. All in favour? Those against? Carried. We now move on to page 91, 12.1, development applications determined from the 30th of July. Move Councillor Nelson, second Councillor Halstead. Any discussion on those applications determined? I put it. All in favour? Those against? Carried. 12.2, page 104, development applications received from the 30th of July to 26th of August. Move Councillor Turlin, second Councillor Scandrett.
I've got a question in relation to item 71, 111.
Page 71.
Triple 71.
Yes,
I'd
number
like to
71.
add to the recommendation
Page
there,
111.
which I don't think you can second it, Councillor Scandrett, because it relates to your property 144.
I think, should you be perhaps Councillor Scandrett, remove yourself from
Well, what's
the...
coming is I'm going to add number 2 and 3 to it. Number 2 will be that the item 7110/0414.05 at 144 Mount Broughton Road, 82A review be determined through peer review as per the original DA. They're not council staff.
With the greatest respect to that.
Councillor Scandrett, I don't really think you should be here. I think it's...
Well, I didn't see there's something significant to declare, Mr Mayor, but as it so happens, it is going to peer review.
You're not allowed to answer that question. Do you mind?
Can
moving,
you
Mr. Scandrett?
please, Councillor Scandrett, I can only advise that you leave the chamber.
Never-ending witch hunting here. A never-ending witch hunt, he said. Never-ending witch hunt.
So item 2 is exactly what I said.
Councillor
You want to
Scandrett
rewrite it?
has left the chamber. Now, the
Be
question
determined-
is,
The 82A review be determined through peer review.
well,
It's not in there, you need to put peer review in there, otherwise... Oh, it is there, down the bottom, peer review, I've seen it.
We have a bit of an issue.
can we, before you do this, Councillor Turlin, can I ask questions to the staff before you move a recommendation? Might save a lot of trouble. I would like staff to have an input into the request from Councillor Turland through you, Madam General Manager.
I would just like to point out that the
Turn
motion
your
at the
light on.
moment is moved by Councillor Turland and seconded by Councillor Skendrett, who has now just left the room. So
That is irrelevant to what is now being discussed, and that can be altered at another time, because Councillor Skendrett will have to withdraw his moving. I want to know from the staff in relation to this DA what it entails, what it entails, and is there a need for it to be peer reviewed? Because I think there is a point that Councillor Turland has raised, but Mr. Pepping, through you, Madam General Manager.
Through the General Manager, this 8.2A review is a review of a modification application which was determined by Council by way of refusal. The assessment of that report and the report itself was peer reviewed by an adjoining council. So likewise, this 8.2A review will also be sent to another council for assessment, and then a report will come to council following that assessment.
Okay, so it does not need a resolution by council. It is going to happen.
Can I ask another question, Stan?
Are you going to ask a question?
In relation to the investigation...
Turn your light on. Question.
Works that have been undertaken on the property, has that been undertaken by council staff or the same peer review? Is to take
Mr.
any
Pepping.
inference that council staff have any, and councillors have any influence against each other in relation to their properties?
Through the General Manager, the assessment of the alleged non-compliances or the out of the exempt provisions was undertaken by Council's compliance officer, and a report will be provided back to Council in due course.
Ooh, I don't think that's very good. I think we need to have a... Well, I'll have to bring a motion back because this is not part of the...
No, it's not part. It's what we are discussing here
Is the DA,
whether
the
any
A2A.
DA should come to council or not.
Yeah.
That's how it works. You could put Councillor Turland that in relation to number 71, it be noted that this is going to be peer reviewed by
that's fine.
another
Well, this is
council.
the first time we've been told. Yeah.
Yes. So
that it be noted
that
the Section 82A review will be undertaken
by
an independent
council reviewer or council planning engineer. No, in a planner and in an adjoining council. Yeah, we don't have to name councils or anything else. Okay, so you're happy with that? Okay, now, wait a minute. Why, please, can somebody ask Councillor Skendrett to come back in, please?
Just get somebody else to second it.
Yes, he's got to withdraw. Yeah, I know.
Otherwise he hasn't met the pecuniary interest provisions.
Councillor Skendrett, you were the seconder of this motion. My suggestion to you would be that you withdraw your seconding, as you left the chamber through having an interest. I said I don't direct anybody that they have a pecuniary interest. I suggest very strongly that you may have.
See what the tape says, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to have that withdrawn, but
Councillor Skendrett, no, there's no point of order. Are you withdrawing your seconding?
Yes.
Okay.
Point of order when you're ready.
Do I have a seconder? Of Councillor Nelson. So there is a, Councillor Scandrett withdrew his seconding as he had declared an interest and left the room. And is there any debate?
No, you can't ask that.
You really, Councillor Scandrett, I don't know why you do this. In theory, again, I suggest to you, if you declared a pecuniary interest by leaving the room, it may be wise to do the same thing while the vote is taken. It is up to you. If you do not think, then I will put the recommendation.
I will leave.
It is all for your own protection, Councillor Scandrett.
It's a witch hunt, and I'm sorry to see everyone participating.
Okay, I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, carried. Somebody invite Councillor Scandrett back in, please. I do suggest that any councillor who has any business in the business paper in any way declares at least a non-pecuniary interest of lesser significance. That's the least, in my opinion, you should do. 12.3, development application for a residential flat containing 10 units, 1 Kangaloo Road, Bowral. Can we have an introduction, please, so everybody's aware this one is? Thank you, Mr. Pepping.
Through the General Manager, the purpose of this report is for a development application for a residential flat building containing 10 units on the property known as 1 Kangaloo Road, Bowral. The assessment of this application has shown that the development is compliant with the Bowral Development Control Plan, with only very, very minor variations on 2 accounts. So nothing more really to add, apart from the fact that this report is recommending that the application be approved.
Councillor Turland, you're on your feet like a jack in the box tonight.
Yes, I can see that. The recommendation, we were going to add to it a couple of trees. Is it further down in that?
Be it true, there should be. Well, we can write point 2 that the radiata pines adjoining the property be removed at the applicant's expense and be replanted with the approved street tree.
Master plan.
I'm not,
It's with regard
oh,
to-
you already got it.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for it to come up.
Maybe we should just put it as point 2.
Yeah, I think you need to
It's
mention
just
also
frozen
Mossvale
for a
Road,
minute,
because
just
there's none
give
on,
it time to unfreeze.
none on Kangaloo Road.
Do you have that again to type it in?
So it's moved by Councillor Turland, seconded by Councillor Whipper.
Let's find the additional wording.
And I do note that Councillor Whipper is supporting the removal of 2 radiata pines and that they are radiata pines without trying to mention they're of any other species.
They don't even make good firewood.
No, they don't.
Mark, just word it up again if you want.
Yeah, we just can't type anything at the moment.
Oh, here's a pen.
Write it, yeah, here's a pen, yeah.
Well, Mark, Do we want to just...
Mr. Pepping.
Sorry, Mr. Pepping.
Do you want to read it out?
That the two radiata pines...
So the recommendation will be subject to the attached conditions of consent as described in attachment 1 to the report and the inclusion of the following additional condition.
Yeah.
The two Pinus radiata trees located on the road verge along Mossvale Road be removed at the owner's expense and replace the removed trees with trees in accordance with Council's street tree master plan as applying to the Barrel Township.
Yep.
That's what will be in
That's
there.
what will
Fine.
be.
Happy
Okay,
to
so
take-
councillors are aware, everybody's aware, that is what is, even if it's not on the screen. There it is.
Took a while.
Took a while. Do you wish to speak to it, councillor Turl?
No.
Okay,
Good,
then it's
good.
been moved and seconded. If you remove your light, then I put it all in favour. But it's a planning matter, so please raise your hand. Councillors Turl, Nelson, Andrews, Scandrett, Whipper and Halstead and Gare, unanimous. Carried. We now move on to page 124, development application, modification of approval, vehicle repair shop, 80 Station Street and 13 Walker Street, Barrel, and that the request for a footpath not to be constructed be refused. Do I have a mover or a second for the recommendation?
They want an introduction.
Can we have an introduction?
Through the chair, the purpose of this modification application relates to DA 17/0816, and it's the property is a vehicle repair station at 80 Station Street and 13 Walker Street, Barrel. This development application was the resultant of a fire that destroyed the former Reeky's Tyres building, and a new building has been built there and is operational. This particular modification application seeks to remove a condition of consent which requires the owner of the property to install a pedestrian footpath on the three frontages to the property, being Station Street, Funston Street and Walker Street. The modification application is seeking to have that condition removed. The staff have assessed the application and recommended that the modification application be refused.
Okay, councillor Nelson.
Yeah. Oh, a question? Yep.
Yes, you can have questions.
The condition 14, it says condition 70 there, so I'm not quite sure. Oh, that's the footpath, but condition 14 of the DA says that the site be consolidated into one lot prior to construction certificate. A splayed corner of the southwestern corner of the site is required to be dedicated to council for public roadway. While this will have a public benefit, this is in the context of the existing situation in which the portion of the footpath verge is actually on private land. Private land. So the question to you is, we actually never owned the corner of the site, and we've said to the owner, through this DA, we want you to give us this corner, we won't pay you for it, you can't start to build until you give us this bit of corner, which then, if you don't give us the corner, you can't do the footpath because you own the land. Is that how I said it?
Okay, question, councillor, Mr. Pepping, through you, Madam General
Look,
Manager.
I don't have those conditions of consent, but no, that's not the intent. There was the way that whole intersection was configured, the frontage of the property was very close to the street frontage. There is a power pole there that was also removed, but one of the conditions back in, when the DA was assessed back in 2017-18, required that there be a splay corner, yes, to ensure that there was no encroachment of the building onto that corner, which would obviously have some impacts on traffic. But this particular issue has nothing to do with the splay corner. This is purely about the condition of consent requiring a footpath to be constructed on the three road frontages to the property.
Thank you.
I've got the subdivision plan. It clearly shows that nothing can happen there, and it's clearly in condition 14, because the footpath verge is actually on private land. There it is there. There's the subdivision. That's the condition saying we want that corner.
Okay, you've
There's
asked
I
the
can pass
question.
them up to
The
you if you wish.
councillor, Mr Pepping, has answered. So, what's the...
Well, the issue is, we'll take the bit of land off you.
No,
I'll talk in the debate.
thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'm happy to move a motion. Look, I'd like to move that we approve the modification application by deleting condition 70.
Which is?
Well, that's it. Which is option one of the options. And I'll just speak to that, why I'm doing that. And I understand that there's I understand that council wants to see a lot more footpath paving developed, but we did an inspection on this site, Mr Mayor, and on the other side of the road there's a footpath all the way down that side. So there's one already constructed which the people living on that side of the road would come out, use that footpath and then cross over the road. And there's provision there where it's safe enough to get halfway because there's a divide, and then use the and then get safely across. So I can't see the side that we want to build a footpath on actually being used. So in that regard, then I'm happy to go with the option to allow them not to build a footpath. So, except I would like to see a small splay of footpath when the people cross over, and that's from the telegraph pole onwards. So I'll see how it goes, because I'm not sure that I've got the numbers to carry this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett.
Yeah.
I'm going to move the original recommendation, please, Mr Mayor.
That's
Yeah,
going to
I'm
have
just-
to be foreshadowed.
that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you. And I'll come back to the debate.
Okay, Councillor Turlin.
Okay, I've got a DVD to hopefully play in a minute. Not a DVD, it's an image stick. Okay, councillors, this is the subdivision plan there. That's a survey plan. That bit of yellow that's drawn on that plan shows the splayed corner, and it's basically from the power pole all the way to the boundary. And as condition 14 says, pretty clearly, that it relates to a footpath that's on private land. So it's they don't own it, council doesn't own it. So what they've done in the conditions of the DA, they've gone, there it is there. There's the power pole. They didn't own that bit of land. So less than probably 600 millimetres from the back of the power pole to the curb is all council owned. So the only way they could get it is to legalise it, but not pay for it. Not pay for it, just say we want it. And so I find that extraordinary. And then you'll have to do a $25,000 bond to build a footpath that takes you nowhere. This particular gentleman had a fire. That's his existing building that he had for 40 years. He didn't increase the building size. It's still 5 bays. He happened to buy the back block, which he did over years, and he built he was going to build at some stage something on the back block, but I don't think he anticipated he would be building a building this quickly. So what we have is a DA of a fire that wrecked a business in the Shire. And when he lodged the DA for the new works, he did work with council to change the entrance and exit at his cost. But he hasn't increased the size of the building. It's still the same size as it originally started. I don't know where our DVDs are, but well, if you could, but it might be a bit late. They're going to ring the bell on me very shortly. I highlighted this section here. That is the original against the new building. That's the original. There's the fire playing now. So what we've got is he's gone in his benefit at his cost to improve the entrance of Station Street and exit back off Walker Street at the benefit for the community, and it cost him money to do that. And here we are saying, you'll have to do a footpath because that's the way it is under the DCP. But he's already paid his Section 94 contributions. This is in the township area. So really we're double dipping, because if this footpath was identified as a footpath that needed to be done, all other DAs lodged in Barrel Township area would contribute to it. But it's not even flagged on their plan to do this footpath. So it can't be that important. So I think we're just... The owner has been told he has to give this bit of land to council without paying for it.
Thank you. Speakers against?
Yep.
Councillor Scandrick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, what a joke. Here we are, we've got Station Street, which my figures, which have come out of council figures, $40 million. And that's to provide better traffic, faster traffic through the town and increase, improve footpaths and so on. No, let me
he's
speak.
allowed to call a point. He's allowed
You didn't hear mine.
He's allowed to call a point of order.
You didn't hear mine.
Whether I allow...
You didn't hear mine. I called one.
Yeah,
you didn't hear it.
No, I did hear it. You didn't go on with it. Councillor Turler.
Point of order.
You refused
will
it.
you
The
please
$40
sit down?
million, has that been ratified by council?
Okay. You can't
make statements that aren't
Councillor
true.
Turler, no point of order. Please sit down. Councillor Scandrick.
He's got to retract that 40 million.
It's not true.
I'll say it again, 40 million.
It's,
No, it's in the council's own figures. It's in
Councillor
the letter in the
Scandrick.
paper last week. Go look at it. But this is amazing. Here we are, there's no footpath in Station Street. Here is a requirement to construct that because the building has been replaced. The applicant has accepted that condition, and now we've got, well, I don't know what old network working here, but the network that I see here is not putting safe walking paths through the Shire, which are incremental at the best of times, Mr Mayor. They get put there, unless we build a whole long one, right, we get them in bits. We know that, because they're everywhere in bits. So I have no intention whatsoever of voting to waive this condition, right? This is a requirement of our 2031 is to improve footpath and pedestrian access across the Shire. It was a condition of this consent. The owner has built the consent, so it's a bit late.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrick. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, look, very short, quickly. Okay, we can argue at the moment the footpath is possibly not required, but then again, you put a footpath there and it'll get used. You can almost bet on it, even if it's in 2 years' time. But the point I can't escape, and listen to the debate on my right, the point I can't escape that this was a condition of consent. Now the building's operative and the business is running, and we get this thrown back at us. It was a condition of consent, and we should acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I'll, before your right of reply, I have spoken to the applicant, so what I say now is no different to what I said then. I'll never miss an opportunity for a footpath. That was one of my platforms of getting elected. I have fought for footpaths all the term on council, and I will continue to fight. You've got to remember that area, and yes, it is an impost on the applicant who has gone through hardship. Can't get away from that. But we have a policy, and until you change that policy, we have a policy. And we ask businesses that do not have any link with any footpath to make sure that when they build a new building that they construct a footpath at the front of their premise. So one day, as Councillor Andrews made the point, the missing links can be added to and we have a network. The other thing is that whole area of Walker Street has been rezoned. And it's been rezoned to business, and as such, hopefully there will be the need for networking of footpaths. Not all footpaths are necessity at the time, but boy, if you ask the people in Moss Vale who went for 150 years or whatever without a footpath down the main street, whether they enjoy their footpath now, I think they give a resounding yes. So yes, I do agree. It appears that council is asking too much. There is always the way of delayed payment, that it can be paid off over a period of time under hardship. There is a bond there. I can understand the need for cash flow, and maybe the talking to the financial part of council staff, some arrangement can be reached, but I will not resile away from, as Councillor Scandrett pointed out, a new footpath in a residential area or build-up area. Councillor Nelson, you're right in reply.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I can count the numbers and see that it won't get up, so I won't pursue the idea of the splay down the bottom end. I was purely coming from what I believed was a common sense approach to this, and I think you'd confirm, Mr Mayor, that I did speak to you about that on the day, if you would recall. So, as opposed to Councillor Scandrett's loose tongue where he said, and I quote, "I don't know what network is working here." Well, I'll take inference to that if he's inferring that I'm ganging up with some other councillor here to get this approved. I refute that entirely. I trust that he's not making it in that way.
I will suggest that Councillor Scandrett would never suggest that, Councillor.
He wouldn't suggest that at all. So, Mr Mayor, I'll just leave it at that because I've made my point, and that ends the debate.
Thank you. You have taken your right of reply. So I put the amendment as moved. No, we have to put. You've got the foreshadowed.
It comes because it's a direct negative.
No. It's a foreshadow. He said that subject to the debate being taken, it will be a notice arising.
We need to deal with the motion on the books first.
Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you. Okay, all in favour of the amendment, the motion, please raise your hand. Those against? I declare the motion lost. We now have and I'll put the councillors, I don't think it's a planning matter, but it is a planning matter. Councillors Turland and Nelson in favour, and Councillors Scandrett, Andrews, Whipper and Gare against. And now we have a notice, a foreshadowed or notice arising, and that the recommendation become the motion. Moved by Councillor Scandrett, seconded by Councillor Whipper. So that, do we need to go into debate again? We do. Councillor Turland.
As I've showed you before, condition 14, the footpath verge is actually on private land. Council doesn't pay for it, or hasn't paid for it. I find it extraordinary that somebody can say, we're going to take that bit of land, it's in the DA, and you can't start to build until you dedicate that land to us. Dedicate the land to us, because council doesn't own it. If that isn't a part of blackmail, I don't know what is. It's blackmail. You can't start the work. 2 years of the fire, had to move.
No, there's no point of order.
That's an inappropriate word, Mr Mayor. It reflects poorly on the applicant.
Well, doesn't on the applicant.
But no point of order. It is an opinion, and as such, it is an opinion of Councillor Turland's.
Well, my view is that council should be paying for that. My view is that council should be paying for that verge they didn't own.
Councillor Scandrett, may I have the...
Yes, it quite clearly says defamatory. And
Thank you.
To say blackmail is defamatory.
Yeah, I'll still stick with my motion, my comment that it is an opinion of Councillor Turland, but I do ask Councillor Turland that you use the correct, appropriate language in relation to debate.
It's heavy-handed. We're going to say, well, you can't start to work after your fire. You've nearly gone broke because you had to move to another premises. 2 years in the process to go through the system. We don't own that bit of land, but unless you give us that bit of land, you can't start to build. But we won't pay you for it. That's all right, we won't pay you. You just got to give it to us. Oh, then by the way, condition 70 says, now you've got to put a footpath down a piece of land that you own. But we're not going to pay for it. If that isn't heavy-handed, I don't know what is. If that's the way we treat people in the public, because we never owned the land. There's no compromise. Okay, what he should have done is stood up the condition on condition 14 and 70 at the time to try and get some common sense or compensation back from council who never owned a bit of land. To me, it's heavy-handing. You will do what you're told. You will then put the footpath in. And you know this bloke was under stress. He didn't mean to do a DA. The thing burnt down around his ears. So what do we give him? We give him 2 years of grief. We take a bit of land off him and then we tell him he's got to do a footpath that was never there in the original approval. Never there. And then Section 94 contributions, he's already paid for. You're double dipping. You're charging him twice for the same sort of work. It's not identified in the Section 94 contribution for the Barrel Township for that footpath to happen. It's not even on any plan, not even any scoping plan. It's nothing. But we'll push this bloke to do it. Oh, by the way, he's just had a fire. You know, what do we care? We don't care. We don't care about the community, but we also won't pay you for the bit of land we don't own. We'll just take it. You can't start to work until you actually give us that bit of land. Councillors, come on. Where are you going with this? Obviously, you guys have never had a fire or distress. Unbelievable. The only thing that I would be prepared to add to this, if we can, if the mover and second would allow us to actually negotiate with the applicant for a time period to do the footpath that you guys are forcing him to do. Unbelievable. Here for the community.
Councillor Scandrett.
Anyway, Mr Mayor, the condition of consent was accepted at the time. We hold a bond, I'm not sure what the amount of that is, and the applicant agreed to provide the improvement to town works. I move the motion be put.
Thank you. So I move, the recommendation is as printed. I ask that all those in favour please show their hands. Councillors Scandrett, Nelson, Andrews, Whipper and Gare. Those against? Councillor Turland. I declare it carried, and we move to 12.5, page 132, draft development control plan amendments. It says, well, I think we should have a quick introduction to this, as quickly as Ms Stannard can do, seeing she's been waiting patiently in the wings.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through the chair. Briefly, the first three of these amendments relate to clarifications of controls that are in the DCPs and came to light as beginning to cause increased confusion or requiring clarity. So we have addressed those, I guess, to try and provide the black and white situation that we'd all like to see in the DCPs. The first one is to clarify that where a dual occupancy only needs to be a maximum of 100 square metres if the lot is not capable of subdivision. The second one is to clarify that council wants if it's to be a second storey, it is to be within the roof line. And the third one is to emphasise that regardless of any misunderstanding in the development control plan, when it comes to subdivision of a dual occupancy, the local environmental plan, which provides the legislative framework within which the development control plans are applied, specifies under clause 7.2 that you need 1,000 square metres on a corner lot in order for a dual occupancy subdivision under the local environmental plan. So those matters are to clarify the development control plans in that regard. The final one is to finalise a resolution that Council made in supporting the planning proposals to permit to permit development on lots in Berrima in Nathan Street and Odessa Street, and that prior to doing that, the DCP be amended to put in extra controls. So we've held up completing that amendment until the DCP controls are finalised.
Okay, questions, councillors? You can chat amongst yourselves after the meeting. So, in relation to minimum lot size approved for subdivision, namely dual occupancy, anywhere in the Shire, including Renwick, can you just, what else could you add to that, please, Ms Stannard?
Under the provisions of the local environmental plan, a subdivision is permitted if the lot is a multiple of the minimum lot size. So if the minimum lot size is 700 square metres and the lot is at least 1,400 square metres, a subdivision is possible. The only exception to that is where is under clause 7.2, which permits in an R2 low density residential zone where there is reticulated water and sewer, the exception being Berrima, or where there is a B1 zone. If there is a 1,000 square metre on a corner lot, then it is possible to construct an approved dual occupancy and then subdivide that corner lot. And the intent of that was to enable some infill development to occur, the corner lots being a more open context than within the street, the middle of the street. So that clause permits the only clause that permits the variation to the minimum lot size controls.
Okay, so 500 square metres or 450 would not be permissible for dual occupancy once this comes in?
Not for subdivision of a dual occupancy.
Not for subdivision.
No.
Thank you. Okay, any questions to Ms Stannard? Councillor Turler.
Dual occupancies are allowed, but they're not allowed to be subdivided up to 450 square metres. Is that what you're saying? They're on one title. That's how I understand?
That's correct, yes.
So you can still do dual occupancies on 455, 600 square metres, but you can't subdivide them.
Our development control plan specifies 1,000 square metres minimum lot size for a dual occupancy development.
You can't do it on 600.
So you can't, from here on, we can't do anything from 1,000, below 1,000. They can't be built at all, or you can't subdivide them.
1,000 square metres is the minimum lot size for construction of an approved dual occupancy. I'm aware that there have been approvals below that, but our DCP says 1,000 square metres. In order to subdivide, you need the minimum lot size, a multiple of the minimum lot size, or to be able to do it under clause 7.2 of the local environmental plan.
Let me just clarify my question. So if there's current blocks out there on corner blocks that you can currently do dual occupancies that are under the 1,000 square metres, we're not going to allow them.
The local environmental plan does not permit that, and that overrides the development control plan.
Well, how does Renwick, if you're saying the LEP overrules, how are we in Renwick doing sites from under 1,000 square metres?
This is, yes, it's the subdivision.
It's only subdividing. That's what I was trying to get at. So you can still have them under, you can still build them, but you can't subdivide them. They're on one title. That's what, I just wanted to clarify that point. So it's not knocking them out. You can still have them, but you can't subdivide them off and sell them individual apartments.
There will be a maximum floor area of 100 square metres.
Yeah.
Under 1,000 square metres, you can't be subdivided.
Yeah, this is only a draft situation at the moment, isn't it? Draft.
No, this
This is
this
it.
is a post-exhibition report. There were no submissions to the exhibition.
So this has been out on exhibition.
4.5. Amendments.
Okay. Thank you, Ms Stannard. All right, there's the recommendation. Have we got a mover? Move Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Andrews. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour? Those against? Oh, it's a planning matter, so everybody is carried unanimously. 12.6, request for a refund of development fees by Southern Highland Botanic Gardens, page 138. Move Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Scandrett. Any discussion? This is requesting a 50% reduction in relation to DA fees.
Yeah, I'll just speak to that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'll just mention it was discussed earlier that this application complies with the standard, and in future there's no need for these applications to come before council because they meet the 50%. It's only when there's a variation outside the 50% that they should come to council.
Yes, good point, Councillor Nelson. Yeah, it saves those non-profit areas not to have to come to council for approval. Put the recommendation as moved by Councillor Nelson and Scandrett. All in favour? Those against, carried. It's not a planning matter, but thank you, carried unanimously. We go to 12.7, Children's Services Delivery Review. Move recommendation, Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Whipper. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Now, which one? The report is confidential,
Yes,
so
Mr.
we're
Mayor.
moving into closed.
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Whipper.
Yes.
How can you debate it if we're moving into closed?
Well, you asked, and I'm just going to ask a question. So that's all right.
Right, well,
My
we can ask
question
a
is,
question on
was,
whether...
was the matter that's in this report discussed with any of the staff?
Yes, councillor, it was.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now put the recommendation as moved by Councillors Whipper and Nelson, or Nelson and Whipper. Put it. All in favour. Those against, carried. 16.1, minutes of the Traffic Committee meeting on Thursday, that the recommendation be adopted, and I imagine Councillor Halstead will be moving this. Moved by Councillor Halstead, seconded Councillor Turland. Councillor Turland?
Yeah, look, Councillor Howstead put up a police parking spot.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be here, is it? Can you find it?
The minutes. The minutes. What item number of the minutes?
Well, that's what I was just trying to find.
Right at the very end.
Oh, 5.17. Item 20.
Yeah, allocation of car parking space to Police Command Moss Vale. Is that the one? Yep. 5.17. Page 20.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Turland.
Back page. Councillor.
Who?
Do you want to explain? It's a great position, so everybody knows what it's about.
Councillor Halstead. Councillor Nelson, can you turn your light off just for a second?
That is, as our commitment towards policing of this district, we acknowledge the fact that the police could take great advantage of one additional spot in the car park. The one I've noted is the obvious one, which is the most southern one, next to the building. And over a period of time, I've watched this. In fact, I monitored for about 3 months minimum, probably close to 6. And it's the one spot that, quite frank, was really occupied. But I don't think I really have to go into anything more other than to say it's our contribution towards policing in the district. I mean, the others are on the road, except for the few that are on the building. That's the least we can do, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I just mention that the road safety officer is she's terminated. She's resigned from council. I believe that's correct. Is that right?
I can't comment, councillor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say,
Yes.
you know, over the
Pardon
time
me.
I've read the reports of what she's done, and I believe that she's done a really good job, fantastic job here. And I was associated with You Turn the Wheel, and she did a fantastic job there as well. So just wish her well, and she's done a fantastic job for council.
Yes, I went to the You Turn the Wheel, and it was very well run as per usual, and all the children, well, young adults, not children, the young adults, I think, learn a great deal from You Turn the Wheel. To you, councillor, from myself, councillor Halstead, I was at the Vietnam Vets Day for Long Tan, and Councillor Scandrett approached me in relation to the accessible parking spaces at the swimming pool. And I note that you've said that at this stage, not supported at this time. One of the big things is the line marking all has to be changed to put in an accessible car space. But the recommendation that the matter be deferred to the next Traffic Committee meeting on the 14th of November, pending further investigation. Can you tell me what that's about?
Quite frankly, there was no one in the room that agreed to it on the spot without this, which I agreed to straight away. In other words, let's see exactly what the situation is up there, and clearly that's going to be looked at again. It'll be looked at on obviously random occasions, but in particular certain occasions when we know the gentleman's likely to use it, and we'll see what the situation with the existing, because one thing I've seen in my life in many places is the oversupply of disabled parking when it's not needed. Now, I'm not saying that's the case here, it's probably not, and certainly in terms of the very things you've already issued or spoken about, ticks my wheel, if you like, and that is the person's disabled. Not only disabled, but was a Vietnam vet, which goes right up in my list, but that's beside the point. We look at everyone the same, so you know, I look forward to the right answer coming back at the next meeting, but I'm not going to preempt that. As you know, there's representatives from the police, the local member, RMS and myself, and the technical people there, but so to me that's not something that should be frowned upon in terms of the issues lost. It's not, but we wanted a little bit more info in terms of absolute factual information, that's all it is.
Thank you very much for the explanation. Councillor Turland.
Yeah, look, at the meeting I was there, basically we were going to lose about 3 more car park spaces to put 1 more disabled in, so it really is not. And when council staff had done the counts of the cars turning over in the car park, I think it was only ever 80% full. But one of the big problems we face is council staff park down this end, and they should be parking at the far end where there's always a car park space. Now, I know there's been issues before where council staff have been asked to park up there, but that parking space down this end is for the pool, not staff. If they want to park, they need to go up the other end. I'd like to see the general manager put something to the staff to not let them park close to the pool.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point. We are constructing, and maybe we can get an update on where we're up to with Community Oval. I had a look at that the other day.
I thought we were talking about Barrel Pool.
No, Mossvale. Mossvale Pool. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, and thank you for your interest in this, and thank you Councillor Halstead also. But of course, the level of disability we're talking about here with this particular applicant is one where you need to have the extra wide space so you can open the car door to get the crutches out and so on. So we're not in competition necessarily with the staff, Councillor Turlin, though I do share some view about encouraging the staff to the other end. But what we are talking about is a person who needs to visit 2 or 3 times a week, a medical practitioner who's operating in our centre there within that window of 11 till 1, 11 till 2, and if there's not a disabled space where the doors can open, right, there's a problem. Now, if there was a sticker on a car which was a medical disabled sticker, and they don't need that extra door space, they can park anywhere for any time, as you know, except clearways. This is a very particular situation because of the medical practitioner operating in that time. If that medical practitioner was in the shoulder periods, probably one of the spaces at the front would be empty. So I think we've got to be flexible. We get all these briefings about our ageing population. We go to the ceremonies commemorating those that have served for us, and this is right up the top of my list.
Yeah, look, I don't think the Councillor Halstead, and I just make the point from what Councillor Turland has said, that when, and remember I chaired the Access Committee for 20 years, so I'm very aware, but once you make one space wider, and unless you get it right, then you've got to alter right all the way down, and we lose other space as well, and that doesn't take away. If there's a need, then we will address it. And Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, look, thank you. I'm well aware of that, and there is a standard, Australian standard, which I won't quote, but it clearly says what's got to be in terms of width, and obviously it has to be wider, and there's all sorts of other impacts, but clearly that's not the issue. With all due respect to you, Mr Mayor, and I understand that you've had commitment in the past to that, yes, you know, we'll look at this, but if it's not justified, it won't be approved. But I'm looking forward to the information that comes back to me that says it is justified. But I'm certainly going to write, and as it's been brought up already, something to the GM to suggest that she directs the staff don't park there, because they shouldn't be, in my opinion, in the area that's allocated for the pool, because one, we need the turnover, not full-time parking there that others then can't get into. So that's another issue. But this one here, it'll be done on its merit. I'll look forward to it being able to be approved, but let's hope so.
Yep, and in relation to that, maybe signage up there that says pool users only.
Exactly. Something
simple. Okay, so we put the recommendation, all in favour, moved by Councillor Halstead and Turland, against carried. We moved to 16.2, minutes of the Environment and Sustainability Advisory Committee, moved Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Turland. Is there any discussion on it? Councillor Halstead.
Oh, sorry. If I could, Mr Mayor, I'd just like to say it was a very productive meeting, this meeting. Mr Mooney was certainly present at the meeting, and we went through some of the finances surrounding the environment levy itself, and I think that was information that was well received by the Environment Sustainability Committee as well. And I think it opens up the opportunity for the community through the committee just to keep tabs on those projects that are underway, gives them a sense of confidence. And I must say, all the committee members did acknowledge Mr Mooney's presence and the presentation that was given, and they felt much more comfortable knowing that that there would be a standing financial overview of the expenditure of on-the-ground projects as well. So it was a very, very good meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Whipper, and good on you, Mr Mooney. That was raised, had a fair bit to do with the debate in relation to the budget, I think. So I put the recommendation, all in favour, against, carried. We move to 18.1, page 195, notice of motion, climate change.
Minutes of the Finance.
Minutes of the Finance
Page
Committee,
184.
yes, 184. Moved, we'll still move the same way. Councillor Halstead and Whipper. Is there any discussion? And I put it all in favour. Those against, carried. Now we move to page 195.
If I have a seconder. Thank you. No, pine trees. So, councillors, and thank you for seconding that, Councillor Halstead. I put this forward. It was something that was requested of me by community members to bring this notice of motion before council for consideration. I think anybody that lives and breathes these days would have to accept the fact that the climate that we're living in is undergoing considerable change. We've got those fires burning in the Amazon. We've got fires raging up in the north part of the continent, and the weather patterns have changed enormously and having enormous impacts on our lifestyle. The other thing that we are concerned about is the impost or the impacts on future generations. That's why part of the recommendation does ask Council to consider, in principle, support for a student strike. Now, I know that has caused some grief among people in the community, but my belief is that the legacy that we're creating for future generations is not a good one, and that I believe that our young people have every right to speak up about the future that they're going to experience. And I believe that it's up to us as elders of this community to actually show some support and some initiative. I remember being at a number of, presentations twice, where I sat in the audience and David Suzuki actually presented and put some very strong cases forward. When I think back, that was some 20 odd years ago. And even at that point in time, he was putting very strong evidence forward that we were heading towards, climate crisis. Unfortunately, that didn't make the media of the day. It seemed to focus more on personalities and movie stars and a whole lot of activities that were happening at the time, where we had global scientists around the world collectively and in unity saying that we were facing very sort of severe outcomes because of our actions and our impact on this planet. So I think in ignoring those warning signs, we've got to a point where some would believe that it's irreversible. I'm hoping that's not true, but I think now's the time really to bite the bullet and to acknowledge that our young people are facing some really dire consequences because of our past actions and our continuing actions and our denial of the current state of the planet and the climate change that we're creating through our lifestyle. So, councillors, I'm asking you to consider supporting this recommendation. I know some people would rather me pull this and have an information session. I've got no, concerns about including an information session in this motion, but I don't believe that if we're serious about this that we should pull the motion. I believe it needs to be supported, and I think that the community at large, there may be some climate deniers still among us. I don't know what planet they come from, but it's certainly, the evidence I think is very conclusive. But I'm prepared to, in point 2, slightly alter that and to read that Council make a formal declaration of climate change emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper.
Okay.
No extension of time. Somebody else will
Well,
add to
I'm
it.
flagging that I will make an amendment to that, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, that'd be good, because that's where I was coming from, and I did actually speak with Councillor Whipper earlier and asked that it be considered as an information session for all councillors. I actually agree in principle with Councillor Whipper, but I feel all the councillors should have the benefit of the staff and Councillor Whipper's knowledge at an information session. And the staff have actually suggested an information session in the last three paragraphs of the attachment here, where it says these changes are likely to affect our community, our place and our economy. An adequate response is required at all levels of government. For Council, this includes both mitigation and adaptation actions. In this regard, Council has developed a climate change adaptation plan which identifies the actions Council will take to adapt to a changing climate and to avoid or minimise the climate change risk. An update of the plan is being undertaken now and is almost complete. So that would form part of the information session. Council has been taking action on climate change for a number of years, and we have ongoing programs in place. There are still many more opportunities we need to investigate and act on. Despite growth in the Shire, Council has reduced its emissions by 8% over the last 4 years through our energy action plans and the RE fund. And here's an important point that Councillor Whip is alluding to, that worldwide 985 jurisdictions in 18 countries have declared a climate emergency, including 45 local governments in Australia. By declaring a climate emergency, local governments have acknowledged that urgent actions are required from all levels of government. So that's pretty true, all that. I'd prefer to have a well-informed discussion about it before we go into this. I do know that some of the councils down the coast have put it forward because they see the sea level rising, but there are some Labor councils down that way which politically it's in their interest to declare a climate emergency. So there's that aspect as well. But we all know, Mr Mayor, that down in Canberra there's a mob that don't agree with Councillor Whipper and the 985 jurisdictions in 18 countries, and they're called the National Liberal Party, or the Liberal National Party.
Steady.
So I was just looking for more information before we actually declare the climate emergency.
So
here.
are you moving an amendment that in the first incident?
Well, I would like to defer back to Councillor Whipper because he was moving that as part. If you give him some grace.
Okay. I'm going to have my little two bobs worth unless somebody else is going to speak. I'm not going to support this motion as it is. Point 6, there's no way I'm going to give in principle support to any young person to go out there and strike on behalf, and council gives them support. That's not in my mantra. I do acknowledge there is climate change, so I'm not a sceptic. And probably I was totally convinced when I went to the Antarctica last year, and that made me wake up and realise. But I don't believe that at this stage we should be, in my belief, declaring a climate change emergency for Wingecarribee. I can understand for the coastal where they believe there is rising sea levels, and we are pulling our weight, as Councillor Nelson pointed out, in relation to what we're doing for the environment, how we're trying to combat it, and even last meeting we had a $56,000 acknowledgement of saving on electricity through our solar panelling. So perhaps, as opposed to calling an emergency, we should be acknowledging climate change, which I acknowledge, and on how we're going to, as a council, work together to help alleviate the concerns that we have. And in that instance, I think an information session outlining all of that is probably the best in the first instance. We are making a definite and very much a statement on the run, as far as I can see. We haven't been... I can understand Councillor Whipper's comment in relation to the Amazon Basin. 20% of the world's carbon dioxide is absorbed by the Amazon Basin, and what's happening up north. And with a daughter living in Peregian Springs, I'm pretty aware of that one as well. So my suggestion, you'll get everybody on board, Councillor Whipper, if you initially go for a information session. I know you don't want to, you want to make a statement on it, but I can't support it on the first instance in relation to that until we get some idea from staff on how we're going to deal with it. But I'm waiting for it. It'd have to be an amendment or an alteration. I would support 1, and then 2, the council have a information session outlining all the measures that you have put forward as what can we do, rather than go in boots and all straight up. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm pleased that Councillor Nelson mentioned an information hearing. There are a number of things here I've written, and certainly not all negative in regard to the Councillor Whitmer's motion, but it'd be so much, I'd find it much more comfortable to discuss all matters that it could lead to declaring a climate emergency. You know, an emergency, once you declare it, it becomes a reality. You know, in my opinion, an emergency is when you're 500 metres, a fire's 500 metres from your home and you have to move out. Now, that is an emergency. I don't think our Shire is quite near that yet. It's mentioned in 4 years, 8%. We've reduced our emissions. We're doing a lot here. And point 6, there's no way in the world I could ever support that, and I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Whitmer, but you know, children up to age 12 shouldn't be involved in any form of strike or activity where they become activists at that age. There's plenty of time once they hit university. Thank you. I would like to see an information with all councillors present here.
Is anybody prepared to move an amendment to that effect?
And I'm just flagging that I'm going to make a slight amendment to my motion as well, Mr Mayor.
Right. Councillor Halstead. Hang on, do we have a seconder for that, for the amendment?
Which one?
What is it?
Well, the amendment that information session be held with all councillors. Councillor Scandrett seconding. Can we get that worded up, please, Councillor, Mr Pepping? Councillor Halstead.
I don't think there's a more conservative person in this room than me, and that includes this councillor over here. Well, he might be a little bit more conservative than me, I doubt it, right? But an information session, the same thing comes up time and again. If you want to get rid of something, let's have an information session, which is a sure way of making sure that it's the end of it. Now, that may not be your intention, you'll probably be able to say that, because you're pretty conservative as well. So what I see happening here is a political divide, and that's not the way this should be dealt with. And I'm glad you finally admitted, my God, I wrote here, he's admitted there's climate change. You said that, and it's on the tape. You actually went along with it, you said, after your trip to...
Yeah, that convinced me.
That's fantastic, because I doubt, if you hadn't done that trip, I doubt you'd be saying that now. But if you cannot see now, all of you sitting here now, what is going on worldwide with the environment, there's something drastically wrong. Now, okay, the wording of emergency is probably not what we want to see, but I'm not going to sit by and be, by not being part of something that takes an action. So if we're all to talk about the things we've done, fantastic, tick, 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 tick. We've done this with the lights and this, that and the other, minimal. This is about getting on board and telling and saying to the community here and the wider community, we actually believe what's going on and there's a problem and we need to address it. So we need to get on board, maybe not number 6 at this stage, although I'd support that as well, because maybe as conservative as I am, I believe in free speech for kids, all right? So if that gets knocked off, you'll probably find your motion will go through, although with all due respect, Mr Mayor, you're against number 2. So that's the emergency bit, no doubt. Hopefully we'll get something out of here, because what I don't want to see is we're back in here, like the one on this recently has been knocked over twice. Who may come here and deliver a prayer, for God's sake? That's been bowled over twice. Not this one. We need some commitment to accept the fact that it's major climate change worldwide. I don't know how anyone can say otherwise. I haven't had one single person say to me in the last 10 years that there's no such thing as climate change. I've heard the right wing of the politics in this country, certain people that stand up and say, no, there's no such thing, the sceptics as they call them. My God, just have a look around. We see it everywhere. The fact that we're sitting up here and we're not down next to the coast where there will be inundation. You've seen what happened with the recent event over there at the Bahamas or wherever it is. There's places in the world that are well and truly what we call western parts of the world that are going to have trouble. And they're going to include parts of this country. I looked at a document the other day and it wasn't on those lines. I thought, these places are going to flood too. And they weren't even talking about emergencies in terms of the environment, but places on our own coastal strips are going to be all sorts of problems. We won't be here to see it, but unless we take an action and get sincere about it, and I'm certainly, to me, I want it known, and I don't grandstand about anything, but I feel strongly about this one, and as right-wing as I am, I believe that there is environmental disaster in front of us, and we are witnessing climate change to an extraordinary length at the moment, or percentage. So we need to do something. So I won't be part of, well, let's have an information session, that's the end of it. That's the way to bury it. If you look at this and pick out what's relevant with it, that'd be the way to act responsibly, in my view. And then as part of it, you can look at a review and information session. Do I think I'm going to get all the information from these people sitting up here? Definitely not. Do you think that? I doubt it. And I doubt any one of them sitting here would say collectively they'd have all the information on that. So it's about us getting enough information ourselves. And if you haven't got enough already, my goodness, I don't get it. That everyone sitting here at this table tonight, including the two that aren't here, wouldn't have enough information already to know you've got major problems with climate. Well, the rest of my case.
Councillor Whipper, put me down for the barbecue. Mate, I'll come and feed the kids. They're the ones with the voice. We are supposed to protect these kids and their families. In our closed council, it's not showing anything illegal. There's our bushfire-prone areas. Look at it. The whole shire is ready, tinder dry, to blow up, just like in the northern New South Wales and Queensland. The kids to have a voice. How are they going to have a voice? Like, look at the kids in Hong Kong. They stood up to the Hong Kong government and they made something happen. They made it. And they're still passionate about their area, their country. We have no different. I have no right to stop these kids having a voice. And if you go to the schools are well educated on climate change. The teachers and the education department have taught these kids, and they're on the right path.
Through the chair, Councillor.
They are on the right path. It's the politicians that are behind the back door. They don't realise they're missing out on what the kids are saying. And eventually they'll be taken out of play, because the Liberal Party, most of them, have no idea of what the children are saying, and it's their life. So I believe, Councillor Whipper, you're on the right path. The kids need a voice, and then they need to tell us, the councillors and the community, that their future, we're going to look after them. Because at the moment, we're not doing a very good job of it.
Councillor Scan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fundamentally, you're on the right track with a lot of this, Councillor Whipper. Fundamentally, I do have a problem with us saying principle support. We're not involved in that demonstration. It's not part of this council. So that's one thing there. And I certainly want more information. The word emergency is a sticking point for me, but I fully expect that I will see that word again in this chamber, right? It's just, I think, lining up our ducks. So accordingly, I'm just supporting Councillor Andrews' amendment, and which addresses hopefully all of the issues in your motion, and it could be slightly padded out to say that. We could, for example, insert, which is just addresses the issues, insert the issues. Yep, yes, there, thank you, Michelle. The issues as generally raised in Councillor Whipper's notice of motion regarding climate change.
Yeah, well,
Councillor Andrews, you
I
happy?
wouldn't use. I support what you're saying, Councillor Scandrett, but I don't think I would. And without taking anything away from Councillor Whipper, use Councillor Whipper's name in a motion. I think it would probably be better
put
that
name in motion. Yeah.
the council
I'm trying to give some support to the idea of what you're doing, Councillor. Well,
as identified
in the notice
in
motion.
the notice of motion. Okay.
We're happy with that, thank you.
Yep, you're happy with that, Councillor Whipper. Your light is on, Councillor Whipper.
Mr Mayor, before I have my right of reply, I'd just like to make that minor amendment to the motion. I don't want to lose the opportunity for my full right of reply. So if we can go to point 2, I'll read it out. That council, the way it's written, that council make a formal declaration of climate change emergency and then a information session be held followed by a report to council and then it goes on, which considers how council's plan. So, and a report be brought back to council which considers. So just if you could insert that an information session be held followed by a report to council which considers how council plans and policies works to be brought back. Yeah.
You're happy with the wording up there, Councillor Whipper?
Yep.
Okay.
So that will provide the opportunity for information, but it won't stop this notice of motion from going forward.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you can put the clock on now? Okay, all right, I'll have my reply. So, you're happy with that, to accept that?
Mr Nelson? No.
Okay, all
I'll
right.
second your one. Oh, no,
No, Councillor House
You accept that? Yeah. All right. So, councillors, this is, if ever, after, as I said, I heard Suzuki speak some 30, 40 years ago.
I might have heard the same speech.
I heard him twice and he was giving warnings then. Now, 40 years ago, you might have excused the naysayers, but this day and age, it's unacceptable. So to sit around this table to say yes, but no, I think is ridiculous. The point that Councillors Halstead and Turlin raised, I think, are really significant. What right have we got to sit around this table, stand around this table, and really decide what our young people's future is going to be? My God, if they can't speak up for themselves, who's going to do it for them? Us. And if we're not going to do it for them, then we need to stand accused, the way I see it, because one of the concerns in this community is that this council is made up by men of the same age, no women, no gender mix, no young people making decisions for a whole community. Where is it more obvious than with our young people who don't have a voice? They look to us to make those decisions of responsibility that affects their future. How arrogant is it of us to say, no, you don't deserve the same opportunities we had when we were young, when we were growing up. It's all right for us to exploit this planet, to exploit your future. You know what? For what? For short-term outcomes? Councillors, I cannot believe this, that we would take offence at young people expressing their democratic rights. The way they did in the moratorium, the way they marched, they couldn't vote, they were forced to go to Vietnam. They never even had the opportunity to vote. It wasn't until Gough got in that said this is not good enough. Everyone's got a right to determine their future and a say in their future. Young people have got every right to express that. Now, councillors, I just can't believe it. We're sitting up here in a fool's paradise, and we believe that the whole world's going to burn around us like Nero with his fiddle. Rome's burning, and it's not going to affect us. We're going to be right because we as a council said, nah, there's no climate emergency, there's no crisis, we'll be all right. The world will go down the gurgler and we'll be sitting on this mountain in isolation. Do we really believe that? It is a climate emergency. It should have been declared a climate emergency 40 years ago, and maybe we wouldn't be in this position that we're in now. Councillors, to deny this is just ridiculous. I'll put you all on warning that I'll be bringing this back as a rescission motion if it goes down tonight, and I'll be there with those young people striking because I believe in their future.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. That's your right of reply.
I can't speak against the amendment.
That's
No, the right of
I was
reply.
hoping you needed to get that up to have it in the system anyway.
Okay. So we have on the first basis we have an amendment by councillors Andrews and Scandrett that an information session in relation to the
Information session be held with all councillors.
in relation
Do you want me to read it out?
No, identified in the notice of motion regarding climate change. Okay, I put the amendment.
Put the amendment.
All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors Andrews, Nelson, Scandrett and Gare. Those against? Councillors Turland, Whipper, Halstead. I declare the...
We'd be recording those names, would we not?
Oh, yes. No.
He can have a dissenting vote now.
Yes, you can have a dissenting vote. Yes. Okay. Then I declare the amendment becomes the motion. I put the motion now. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. Councillors
I declare our names be recorded.
Scandrett, Nelson, Andrews and Gare, and those against, Councillors Turland, Whipper and Halstead, dissenting votes. Okay, and I will give you this undertaking. It will not be a wasted information session because I want to get it lined up as well. Yep.
Mr Mayor, before we go into closed council, may I ask that the senior schools have two representatives come to our briefing session so they can actually see how us work.
Hey, but the motion has been put.
Well,
the motion has been put.
We'll sign a rescission motion.
Okay. Thank you. I need a motion to go into closed committee. Move Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Halstead. Any discussion? Then I put it all in favour. Those against, carried. Thank you, members of the press, members of the public. Thank you for your company the other night, Hannah. I shared the table with Hannah the other night at the presentation for the Business Awards.